Today, I want to understand what would have happened if Scar raised Simba. What if after Mufasa died, instead of pushing Simba away, Scar brought him back to the Pride Lands to train him, guide him, and shape him into the prince he wanted him to become? Hello fun people, I'm Isaac Carlson, and if you're interested in weekly Disney discussions, theories, and magic, then consider subscribing. Looking back at The Lion King, it seems clear that in that pivotal moment where Scar confronts Simba after the stampede had passed, that Scar had so much power over him. With an inability to truly understand and cope with what had just happened, the young cub had been emotionally broken by the death of his father. This meant he was in a place where he could be easily manipulated. So what if instead of pushing Simba away in his darkest hour, when he felt completely alone and just desired someone to comfort him or help him in any way, Scar took action to bring his nephew closer to him? Instead of letting Simba befriend a meerkat, a warthog, and a monkey out in the jungle—
Who's the monkey?
Well, I mean more accurately, a mandrill. Maybe Scar could have made Simba feel like he was his new father. In that ravine, Simba was suddenly faced with an uncertain future, and I think Scar could have capitalized on that in a much different way than he had in their true story. What if after acknowledging to Simba that his accident was unforgivable and that his mother would be horrified by his actions, and he saw that the cub was begging for guidance, Scar had told Simba that his only way forward was to pledge his allegiance to him to return to Pride Rock? Maybe Scar could have told Simba that by following him, he could save him and ensure that he would advocate for the cub no matter what. Instead of making Simba feel like he could never return to his home, Scar could have made Simba believe that he could only return by embracing his uncle as the one lion who could lead him into the future. Now, sure, if Simba had actually been killed, Scar may have been able to rule for the rest of his days and even ensure that his hand-picked heir, Kovu, would be able to reign after him. It's possible that everything could have worked out, but of course we know it didn't when he went down that path. Ever since Simba was born, Scar seemed to have wanted the prince dead, which is why Scar forced Simba to believe that he was the cause of his father's death, and he forced the cub to take on that depressing burden so that he would banish himself. But maybe if he would have just taken the other opportunity before him, he could have continued to create his own empire. With Simba feeling a deep connection to Scar for getting him through his father's death, now it would have been simple for Scar to suggest for Simba to allow him to rule until he was of age to become king. From there, Scar could have used his ability to manipulate Simba to mold all of his thoughts, his beliefs, and his understanding of the world. While Mufasa had spoken of the circle of life and the need to keep balance, Scar could have offered new perspectives to deconstruct those teachings.
You know, a sort of father-son thing.
For example, Scar could have brought up why are lions allowed to hunt while hyenas cannot. By just explaining that this is an unequal way of allowing animals into the Pride Lands, I could easily see Simba pushing to allow the hyenas into his kingdom. At the same time, Scar could have persuaded Simba to have an extreme look at putting lions above all creatures, with the thought process being that the rulers of the animals must be protected to ensure the circle of life continues. And I could also see Scar making Simba believe that everyone was after his throne. By pushing Simba to feel he had to be ready for an attack or a war at any moment, I believe the cub could have grown up to be quick to distance himself from others and would grow to become intolerant of those who disagreed with his wishes. I'm sure Nala and Sarabi would have continued to attempt to push for Mufasa to still come through within Simba, but I believe Scar could have brought Simba to internalize that it was him and his uncle against everyone else, especially if Scar continued to frame himself as the only lion who could truly accept and love Simba after Mufasa's death. I believe Scar could have brought Simba to internalize that it was him and his uncle against everyone else, especially if Scar continued to frame himself as the only lion who could truly accept and love Simba after Mufasa's death.
Simba, I'm only looking out for the well-being of my favorite nephew.
I think he could have been swayed to believe that he had to move on from those childish thoughts and memories. I believe Scar could have brought Simba to submit to him and accept that Scar was just as much a father to him as Mufasa had been.
Lucky Daddy was there to save you, eh?
I mean, I also think that would have been pretty easy, with Scar's loyal lionesses supporting Scar and Simba's alterations to the Pride Lands. Throughout Simba's life, he would have surely felt like he was on the right path. I mean, it probably should have been a red flag if Zira is one of your biggest supporters, but a dedicated following behind the two lions would have surely made Simba feel he was growing to transform into the formidable king he was destined to become. And maybe having Zira's lionesses surround him would have driven him to fall in love with a different lioness than Nala. I think it's possible he could have found another relationship that was better aligned with the life Scar desired for him, which I think would have been kind of tragic. But in my mind, Nala would never go along with whatever Simba was going through, and I think that would have only pushed them away from one another more. I really think Scar could have gotten Simba to force every relationship that questioned him away, while he learned to embrace Scar's guidance in his followers, which I think would have eventually led Scar to remain on the throne long after Simba had originally planned for him to remain king. But of course, while I believe Simba could have become attached to Scar, I don't believe the same could have gone the other way. No matter how much Scar framed himself as a father figure, I believe Scar would have always been willing to kill the cub if he ever fell too far out of line. At the same time, while Simba was being raised to be more radicalized, I also think Simba would have descended to be a merciless warrior as well. In a similar way to how Kovu was trained, I believe Scar and his followers would have ensured Simba became a trained killer, with darkness attempting to enter his soul. With Mufasa as his father and with Scar's followers teaching him, I think Simba would have been a dangerous opponent to anyone he fought. With training, I could see him becoming the strongest, most ruthless, and scariest lion to ever march across the Pride Lands. And while this definitely would have been tragic, the idea of seeing a dark Simba fighting off enemies of the Pride Lands, hunting for food, and taking down those who challenged him sounds epic. And let me know down below if you think so too, and whether or not you believe Simba would have allowed himself to get to that point like I do. But even if Scar could have crafted Simba into this menacing and lethal creature, I think there could have been ways that Simba could be led back to be good again. And I kind of believe Scar would have never seen it coming. Sure, Scar had his brilliant moments, but in the years that followed him becoming king, he truly became an arrogant and stubborn leader. He allowed his inflated ego to blind him from the reality of what was going on around him. So if he thought Simba was fully under his dominion, I believe he might have just come to never even consider that Simba's loyalty could ever stray. Maybe he would have been smart enough to realize that Simba's obedience to him was able to crumble, so it's possible he had hyenas at the ready to take down his nephew if there ever came a point where he no longer was useful, but I'm not exactly sure. Either way though, regardless of whether Scar was prepared for Simba's allegiance to break, I think it would have eventually happened. There is the chance that Simba would eventually decide that regardless of his past, he was the strongest lion within the Pride Lands, which would lead to him killing Scar to be free from the hold he had over him. Maybe he would fully commit to take the throne for himself and rule as a more intelligent, heartless, and vicious king than the Pride Lands had ever known. Again, I'm not saying I would support Dark Simba, but holy wildebeest, that would be cool to see. Scar being murdered at night during a thunderstorm by the dominant and strong Simba would be freaking awesome. I just really don't think anyone could have stopped Simba if he would have gotten to that type of mental place. But to be honest, no matter how far Simba would have been pulled to submit to his dark ambitions, I don't think he could have ever remained that way throughout his entire life. So even if he had been raised to be an evil, violent, and cruel weapon, I believe he always had goodness within him and an internal pull to do what was right that would never be able to truly go away. And I think it's most likely that would have come about before he would have ever been driven to take down Scar for his own purposes. I actually believe once Simba had seen the ramifications of allowing Scar's rule to be let loose upon the Pride Lands, that would have begun breaking him from Scar's grasp. If the same drought and overpredation would occur when Simba and Scar were ruling together, I don't know if Simba would have been able to do nothing like Scar. If Simba would see Nala, Sarabi, and the rest of his pride suffering without food and water, I don't feel like he would have stood by and watched them fall apart. Seeing the Pride Lands die, I think could have brought him to rebel against Scar. But of course, if Simba's family and his home dying before him still could not change who he had become, I think Mufasa may have been able to get through to him. Seeing and hearing his father again across the night sky may have changed his perception on how Scar had raised him. I believe Mufasa could have shown him to look at himself and decide he had not become who he was meant to be.
Look inside yourself, Simba. You are more than what you have become. You must take your place in the circle of life.
Similarly to how he had been led astray in his true journey, I think Simba may have had hesitation about his ability to be the person he once was. But if Simba could just understand again that Mufasa was within him, I believe he would be willing to turn away from who Scar molded him into.
You see, he lives in you.
And at that point, I think we would have seen Simba's journey play out as it truly happened. I believe Simba would face his past mistakes with his father's death, no longer allow Scar to manipulate his mind, beg for forgiveness from his pride, and go through the fight of his life to take back Pride Rock. While I think it's likely that Simba could have been led astray from who he was meant to be for a great portion of his life, I believe that no matter what Scar chose to do with him in that ravine when he was a cub, he would have always been able to restore the circle of life. But let me know down below what your thoughts and theories are surrounding if Scar raised Simba. Also, make sure to subscribe and click the beautiful bell, and then click on another magical video in the description or on the screen. Finally, as always, thanks for watching, and have a magical day. Circle of life!